Hi, my name is Bridget and welcome to Bridge to Wellness. Today we have a very special guest and a friend, Ekras Gorakh.
Namaste, Bridget.
Namaste. Namaste. Before we talk about this amazing topic about the true self through yoga, I would love to talk about where you came from and your childhood and how you came here to the United States.
Sure. I grew up in India, and most of my education was in New Delhi, which is of course India's capital. It's in the north of India. My parents are from nearby, near Delhi, and growing up, I'm the younger of two kids, and my father and my parents are both religious. My father was exceptionally religious and spiritual. So as a child, I remember chanting along with him when he would do kirtan, and that was a good experience. And later, so we would visit temples with our parents every week, and got to know a little about the Hindu tradition just by osmosis, just by being in the family. But I was also curious about yoga, and in the early 1980s, there used to be this program on TV which was a yogi describing different poses and different types of breath work and so on. And I would practice those by myself as well. And so the running joke in my family is that I have family photographs from the 1980s where everybody else is, we're out at vacation at the Taj Mahal or wherever else. Everybody else seems to be doing just fine, taking their photos. I'm sitting in a yogic posture. So I guess I got some of that yoga from those. And so I was always curious about the nature of the self and philosophy. Academically, I was a good student, so I did well in my school. And as one does, I ended up going to an engineering undergrad. And then I did an MBA in finance. And since then, I've had a full career in technology sales and leadership. I came to the United States in 2000 when I was sent over by my company to build relationships with our clients over here. And I came to the Bay Area, and I've been in the Bay Area since then. In terms of how I got into yoga, so I told you about my childhood a little. When I was doing my MBA, I read a lot of books on philosophy and yoga, because prior to that, I read a lot of books on Western philosophy and had a fairly reasonable understanding of Western philosophy, but not so much on the Indian philosophy. And one day I went to our library, and this is India's #1 B school, so we had a very nice library for the time. And I go there and I pick out this book on Indian philosophy. And I read that, and it changed my mind completely. It turns out that the Indian tradition has a deep tradition of philosophy and seeking that has continued for thousands of years. And that one book became my segue into Indian philosophy. I started to practice meditation from books at the time on my own, and later we've been to many gurus and learned from many gurus, taken initiation from several different traditions. And the one thing about me is I'm very disciplined. So when I learn something, I find ways to include that into my daily schedule. So over time, my daily schedule fills out with things, and I have to prune them back and make a schedule I can actually handle. But the other thing I ended up doing was, as I added more yogic practices, pranayama, posture practices, meditation practices, devotional practices, as I added more practices, I realized I had to make time, and I couldn't cut back on work. I love my work, and I couldn't cut back on family time. So I cut back on pretty much other nonsense, which is not watching TV, never interested in sports, so that saves me a bunch of time. Movies, I used to fly a lot for my work, so I watched every movie I could only during flights, so it saved me time from watching it in real life.
When you came here, when did you get married? Was it in India or did you?
Yeah. So I met my wife in our undergrad, in our engineering undergrad. And that's where we met. And so we were college sweethearts in that sense. And then we married right after my MBA. And yeah, this is way back when.
I'd like to talk about the true self through yoga.
Most people think about the answer to the question. If you meet someone at a party and someone says, "So who are you?" you're likely to give a response which is external to yourself, which is you might state your name, you might state where you're from or what, which box you belong to. Are you from the red box or the blue box, or are you, you credentialize yourself. You add things about yourself that describe you from the outside. The problem with that is those all keep changing, and a lot of us only pay attention to these adjectives and pronouns and nouns that we add to ourselves. And this is my title, this is my name, this is who I'm related to, these are the people I belong with, that sort of stuff. And
these are my routines.
These are my routines. This is what I. So all of these are external to me, and a lot of people are filled with angst when something happens in their external identity set. Right? My people are losing the game, or my bank balance is coming down, or my car is, something's happened to it. So all of these are external to the self, and people pay a lot of attention to that sort of stuff. But it never brings you joy because it keeps changing, and you're always reliant on someone else for something which should be truly your own internal experience. And so most people that don't explore the true source of the self tend to be occasionally very happy, but occasionally not happy at all, and for the most part because you've put out the source of yourself, you're unhappy. In yoga, since that's your question, what is the true nature of the self in the yoga tradition? In the yoga tradition, they spend a lot of time thinking about the true sense of the self, and the Sanskrit word for this is Atman.
Atman.
And a lot of scripture is written about the true nature of the Atman. But the most popular understanding of the inner self is the 5 sheaths, or the koshas as they're called. And it begins with the outer body and works its way inside. And I can describe that to you if you'd like.
You were mentioning about the physical body, the I, and how we identify ourselves.
Sure.
That is considered the physical body, correct?
When most people think of their I, they think of this physical body, the outside layer of skin, really, not even inside. When I say I am, this person, I'm not looking at my, my intestines or my, my, I don't know, my sinuses to think of myself. I'm really thinking of the outer layer of my skin and maybe a couple of inches outside the body, and that's pretty much it.
And a lot of aches and pains.
Lots of aches and pains that we identify with, that become the sources of our, problems with our own identity. But the 5 layers begin with the physical body. It's called the Annamaya Kosha, and Ann means food, grain, and the physical body is the outermost layer of the self. Everything outside of that is not even ourselves, the relationships and everything else. So the physical body. But then when I die, my family will cremate this body, but they will not have done any harm to me because they love me. So clearly I am not identified merely with this body alone. Something happened between this body and this body when I'm dead. And that's the next layer, which is the vital body, the energies that regulate this body, the circulation of blood, the breathing in and out of breath, the business of growing the hair and the business of digestion. Everything is the energy body, which is the thing that stops when we die, and so we say someone is dead. But beyond that, people identify that with the next layer as well, which is the thoughts. and we say we are our thoughts. So we've looked at the Annamaya Kosha, which is the physical body, Pranamaya Kosha, which is prana, which is the vital body. Then we get to Manomaya Kosha, which is the mind itself. And people think of themselves as their mind. But it's not. If I ask you to think of a pink elephant or not to think of a pink elephant, you now have a mind shaped like a pink elephant.
I really tried just now.
Yeah, and it's right there.
It's right there.
It's sitting there in the middle of your mind. And now your mind is a pink elephant. And so you're obviously not merely your mind. Then there's your sense of yourself, your conscious will that you direct to do things, which is the next layer, which is the Vijnanamaya Kosha. But then behind that is another layer, which is called the causal body or the bliss body. It's called Ananda Maya Kosha. Ananda is roughly translated as bliss, but it's a little more subtle, a lot more enjoyable, and a lot more harder to describe in words. But Anandamaya Kosha, that's the earliest basis of the self. So when we're waking, we're mostly aware of our physical body. When we're dreaming, we're not aware of this physical body, but we have recreated it through the energy body, through the mind, and through the intellect. But when we're in deep sleep, we're neither waking or dreaming. There is still something. And when you wake up from deep sleep, you feel, hey, that was good. Even though you remember none of that. And that sense of enjoyment, that is the residual sense of yourself, is the causal body. It's the source of this creation of this body in the yoga tradition.
I notice when my father is sleeping, he's so calm and peaceful, and at that very moment when he's waking up, it's the purest I see him. And then he starts thinking more and more and more and more. But that's the part where I see him somewhat blissful.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. Talk with your doctor to create a treatment plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do. She gave them some broth without any bread and kissed them all soundly and put them to bed. Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org.
Welcome back. My name is Bridget, and here we have Ekras Gorakh. And Ekras, I'd like to go back and talk about the levels of consciousness in the body, the true self.
So it begins with the physical body and goes all the way to the bliss body in the yoga system. In the yoga system, the actual causation is in reverse, which is the bliss body is the causal body. It's what unfolds into what we now see as the physical body. And so the seed of ourself is bliss, and we experience it as this body. But as we experience it in reverse. It's like if you put 5 layers of clothes on, then you see the outermost layer first and the innermost layer the least.
Does that mean people are feeling more misery? Is that the opposite?
Yeah, they're forgetting their true state of being in bliss, and now they're remembering all sorts of other nonsense about themselves. So, which is, I have a body, that our body aches over here, or I have, my internal systems are not feeling good today because something is wrong, or my thoughts are running in some weird directions, or there's something fractured or broken about my sense of self. These are all things that cause us trouble and anxiety, and all of that takes
Which
us
is
away.
huge, the anxieties and fears.
Yeah, and it takes us away from our true experience of our own selves, which is blissful. So it is only the reason we feel relaxed and somewhat happy, blissful after a good meditation sitting or after sleeping, is because you have essentially transcended these outer four layers and you've come back home in your bliss body. So, for example, if you're sleeping and when you're sleeping, this physical body, aches and pains are sort of out of the way. You're no longer concerned about the physical body, but you still have, your stomach might be aching, or your internal systems might be calling themselves to your attention. You might experience that. You might be thirsty. You might experience that in your dreams as good dreams, or bad dreams, or anxious dreams, or nervous dreams, or fever dreams, and so on. And those bother when you're dreaming as well. But then when you get past that to true deep sleep, isn't it, when you wake up after really sleeping really well one night, you'll feel completely refreshed and completely at peace, like you were saying.
Yes.
And that feeling is our natural state.
How does one hold that agenda of feeling bliss while they're in the trying stage, while they're experiencing getting through their aches and pains? How can they actually be happy and feel pain, physical pain?
Sure. Remembering that our default state is this state of bliss, and not just remembering it because someone's repeated it enough times, but remembering it in your own self and from your own personal direct observation and experience, then you can start to understand that the outer experience, whatever's happening in the body, whatever's happening in our thoughts, whatever's happening in the world outside, that no longer affects you. And the way we do that in our meditation sittings is we begin with the physical body and we say, look, we want to get to a place which is in active relaxation. So you're not lying down because you'll go off to sleep, too much relaxation, and you're not standing stiff, you're sitting upright. So you're actively engaged with the act of sitting upright, but you're relaxed, if the rest of your body is relaxed. Then we get to the breath, and we find a calm place where the breath itself is calm and relaxed. Then we get to the mind, and we find a way to not feed the thoughts and let the mind sit in let the awareness sit on a place that we can hold the awareness firmly and gently. You know what I mean, right? So you're holding it in one place, but gently, not too firmly, and then so your body, your breath, and your mind are all in a place where they're happy, they're comfortable, and yet they're not so lax that they're just falling apart. And then in meditation, when you get to that state, you get to the state which is close to the bliss body. So when you come out of that meditation, you don't remember the specifics of what happened or how much time elapsed. You just remember that you're feeling good about it. And so that's how we do that in meditation. How do you do that in real life? First thing is, just as with meditation, we give instructions to people to not pay attention to the thoughts, neither invite them, nor engage them, nor repel them. Simply ignore them. And keep your attention on your breath or the tip of your nose or what have you. Similarly, any thoughts that bother you, If you try to get rid of those thoughts, you're only feeding them. And if you feed them, more will come. And until you're filled with all those negative thoughts. So remember that your default state is blissful. And choose to not feed the pains or the troubles or the anxieties, and simply remember. And if it's hard to remember, that's why in religious traditions they'd ask us to remember God. Same thing, which is why God is good, God is love, God is all happiness and joy and justice. Remembering God works the same way, because you're remembering that that's our home, that's our default state. And so long as you know that that is the default state, you can remember to not feed these anxieties by paying any attention to them. And by not paying attention to them, you can completely separate out yourself from any temporary changes to your external state, because you're always stable in yourself. So remember how they say time flies when you're having fun?
Yeah.
When you're having fun, you're not asking yourself this question, wait, am I having fun yet? You don't, because you're having too much fun. Those states are blissful states. They're enjoyable states. And those two are reminders of what's possible. If we engage in work, you don't have to be in meditation or sleeping to be in this state of bliss. You could be deeply engaged in work, doing things. And so psychologists call this a state of flow, right? Where the sense of time evaporates. You're engaged, you're challenged. If, kids play video games and they could play for hours and they're completely into it. And that's an example of someone who's into their activities and not asking, am I having fun yet? They're just having fun. And that's the default state, the bliss body itself.
I get that. It's putting yourself in a zone. When I'm working, I put myself in a zone, point A to point B, just go for it.
Yes.
Go for it, keep moving. So much to do. And stay really focused, and same thing. It feels like everything relates to yoga. The beginning, middle, and end to each posture. Connecting your breath with each movement. The beginning of the posture is challenging. You get to the middle, and then towards the end, sometimes I say, oh yes, perfect, now I can move on to the next posture. Wouldn't you say it's very similar to that?
It is, yeah. The act of paying attention to your posture, the act of paying attention to your breath, and the act of disengaging from anxieties elsewhere in the system is also meditative. It also brings us back home. In Patanjali, in Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, he says, Sthira Sukham Asana, right? Which is sitting comfortably in a posture in a posture which is stable and blissful. So sukha means absence of discomfort and being centered in the self, being stable and firm. And so postures can be a great meditative practice. And if you're truly enjoying your postures, even at the beginning of the posture, when you're feeling the challenge, enjoying the challenge. When you're at the end and you're beginning to tire out, enjoying that experience. Just enjoying every step of the journey. And disengaging from things that take our attention away.
Enjoy it and be curious. With a curious mind.
Yeah. That's interesting you say that. In fact, you could use interest as a way of gauging what curiosity and interest as a way of gauging where your mind wants to go. And if it's a good place, you can follow your curiosity and your interest, because if it's interesting to you, it's interesting to other people. If it's not interesting to you, no one else cares for it either anyway. So being curious and being open and letting each moment unfold. And as it unfolds, expectantly looking at it, and even if you've seen it 200 times, still expecting, wait, what might happen here? And that curiosity.
And it could be so much fun just to watch everything unfold.
Mm-hmm.
All the trials and tribulations of life, knowing and having that faith, we will get there. These are trials, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to say on that subject. First thing is we spend a lot of energy in removing the element of surprise from our life. We make everything predictable. You know, bread must be toasted a certain way, the coffee must be made a certain way. But surprise is what makes the entire experience more interesting. And it allows us to look at the world with wide eyes, just like kids do.
It's
And-
just, isn't that saying, have you heard that saying, see things as if for the first time?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting quote, which is just looking at things with a wide-eyed curiosity and wonder, a sense of wonder.
Mm.
You may have seen it 100 times, but it gets you every time. And that's a great experience, because then you're open to life as it unfolds moment to moment. And you're not necessarily waiting for good things to happen or bad things to happen. You're just watching, the story unfold, and you're thinking, well, this is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And deal with that and go to the next thing that happens, moment to moment.
That may take some skill, because I know some people may not have an interest. How does one find that type of interest?
As kids, we were all curious. We would explore everything around us. We just train it out of our system. But it's our natural state to be curious. It's our natural state to be filled with wonder and joy, because that's how we come default. It's the factory state. It's how we come out into this world. We just choose to forget it.
Oh, Dapper Leon. I almost feel like every Friday I have a date. He'll have a vest or a jacket.
She sees me at my best.
Drop off a warm meal and get more than you expect. Volunteer at americaletsdolunch.org.
I'm Rudy Tempesta. I'm 92 years old. I fought in World War II. Then I came home, worked for the post office for 70 years. I've been getting Meals on Wheels, and I enjoy it. The most important thing about Meals on Wheels is you meet the people, which to me is fantastic. You need people to keep your brain moving. That's what life is about. It's love and having a conversation with people.
And welcome back. Moving out of misery. How people can be blissful and on the edge of everything that they do.
How do you feel moment-to-moment joy all the time?
That's right.
It's an interesting question. Most of us actually follow the opposite principle in our life. We're trying to remove the element of surprise in our life. We're trying to remove the element of unpredictability in our life. We want the same thing all the moments, because predictability has some advantages. But the disadvantage is it makes everything boring, and now there's nothing interesting. I read a statistic some time ago. I'm not sure if this is fake news or actual statistics, but a majority of the accidents, they say, happen within 3 miles of the person's home. When they're driving out, because they're so familiar with their surroundings that they've stopped paying attention. And because they're not paying attention, they're likely to have an accident more so than if this is an unfamiliar place, all your senses are up and you're now watching everything carefully. And so that familiarity breeds this sense of this fake sense of comfort, which becomes our cocoon that we like to live in. But it's boring, and it certainly it gets to you after a while because it's too predictable. So how do you stay at the edge of what's comfortable and uncomfortable? Learn to be uncomfortable. Learn to learn new things. Learn to fail. Learn to do things that you haven't done before. Because in doing things in a new way, you will learn to pay attention once again to everyday activities. and that paying attention is what pays off as satisfaction, as joy, or as bliss in our work. So make familiar things unfamiliar sometimes by turning them around. The other is do have discipline in your life, because discipline sounds like the opposite of what I just said, but it's not. Discipline with core things in life allows us to actually have the bandwidth to have the surprise built into other things.
Right.
If getting out of bed requires a lot of action, then you won't even get out of bed, because now you're thinking, what wonder awaits me as I step out of the bed, right? So some things you want to discipline because you do them every day and you do them frequently enough, and you should do them well. And the others, you should be open to surprise and open to everything that happens.
And part of that discipline could be just simple awareness of your language. A lot of the shoulds and can be a little self-sabotage like, and just changing your script, changing your language, right?
Sure.
Would you say? Sometimes we are so stuck on who we are and the words that we use from day to day, that can change things, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
So?
Yeah. In the yoga tradition, a lot of the yogis you have to travel around all the time, because that familiarity reduces your sort of moment-to-moment living experience. So you have to keep moving. I wouldn't suggest that for other people, but they do that in the yoga system. Some sannyasis, renunciates especially, have to keep traveling, because if they settle down, then they become too familiar, and then everything that you become familiar with sort of dies. You're unconscious to it, but you want to live more fully and more deeply. So how do you become more deeply aware and engaged?
Okay.
That's the challenge.
There's a balance there, because in yoga, isn't it that it's best to practice the same asanas over and over and over again? But then again, when we practice, we slowly advance ourselves. So it does kind of become a different posture, correct?
Outer state takes a lot of practice, and once you've stabilized, your inner state is going to change with the postures in yoga, where how you experience that posture will keep changing. And you're a practiced yogi, you have this all the time, you teach, right? Don't you feel that the posture feels different now than it did when you started some years ago?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Your inner experience still continues to be interesting, even though the outer posture may have become routine. And that's the interesting part with yoga postures, where you can still be looking for something interesting that's going on.
Right.
When we teach postures, is it not that we teach people the proper posture, then we tell them the proper breath alignment, then we tell them, okay, now pay attention to X, Y, Z things, right? Those are all ways of getting deeper into your practice, and then eventually you're still intensely curious about something that's going on, even during the posture.
Yoga itself can tell your entire story about how you're breathing and how you're really connecting. I really encourage that so much, is keep moving and keep staying connected. Going back to the true self and the energy bodies, how can you explain that to the audience?
So right beneath the physical body is the prana body, pranamaya kosha. Now prana means air, but you could think of them as humors or vitality. It's the thing that separates an animate object from an inanimate object. In fact, animate also refers to the spirit. So it's the energy body inside us. And usually we don't pay attention in everyday life to the internal body, but there's a lot going on inside the body. As we breathe in, there's a set of muscles that are at work in inhaling. As you breathe out, there's another set of muscles and a separate set of intentions at work as you breathe out. Then your stomach is digesting, your blood circulatory system is working, the excretory system is also working. There's a lot of different systems working. You know, the hair are growing even as we speak. The nails are growing even as we speak. These internal systems are always at work. We're not consciously aware of them, but just beneath the surface of our conscious experience is our energy body. And we can talk to it through the breath, and we can be aware of our internal state through the breath. You can't tell your heart to slow down using thoughts, because what are you going to say? But you can change your breath pattern, which will inform your heart to pump differently. You can't directly address your digestive system, but through yogic practices, through your breath management, and through other postures and holds, mudras and bandhas, right? You can actually address the digestive system as well. So a lot of the internal body we're not aware of, and that's the majority of the physical body that's at work. What we think of as ourselves is a small fraction of the mind, the intellect, that we think of as ourselves. But we're not really. I do this when I do these talks. I do this demonstration all the time. Have we done this before? Where I ask people to raise their left hand if they're right-handed, raise their pinky, look at the pinky nail, and now this is the spare hand, so to speak, and it's the smallest little finger on the spare hand, and it's the nail on the smallest little finger on the spare hand, right? Now you're looking at that nail. Could you, as you're looking at it, do me a favor and grow it about 1 inch right now?
I can grow my nose.
Yeah, not that nail, right? Even though this is the most insignificant nail on your body, you can't grow that.
No.
Consciously, because it's still happening. You do admit that it's growing even as we speak.
It is. That's right.
But you don't consciously control it. And this entire energy body is at work all the time, whether we're awake, asleep, aware of it or not. It's just that we don't consciously pay attention to it until something goes wrong. There's something wrong with that digestion, or the blood is not circulating properly, or the breath is somehow incapacitated because asthma or something has happened. So we are aware of these energies only when they stop working as advertised.
And that's when we determine whether we're happy or sad or angry or mad.
Yeah, but these energies are always at work inside us. And in deeper yogic practices, you start learning to become familiar with the internal constitution of the body, and being aware of the state, and being able to somehow direct the state of these organs. And for example, if I ask you to sweat, you can't sweat on command. But some yogis can. That's just because you have that degree of control over your body, where you can change your skin temperature, you can lower or increase your heart rate. All of these things are possible. And that's the energy body that we're not really aware of, but that does most of the heavy lifting of our everyday lived experience. Our thoughts and our sense of self are a very small fraction of our actual self. If you can't grow your little pinky nail of the left hand, how are you in charge of this body, of the running of this body?
Because it's growing. It's
on
already
its own,
going.
right?
Yes.
You're not commanding it to grow or stop. It's just growing on its own. And so why do you call this body your body? As you. If you can't grow your own little pinky nail, then what of anything else? And that's the thing. We have this fake sense of control over the world outside and over this physical body of ours. But reality is evidently so that pretty much everything outside this body in this world, and pretty much most of this entire body itself, is not in our voluntary control. Sure, I can raise my hand or lower it, but that's a small fraction of everything that's going on. So, and that's the energy body. And in deeper yoga tradition, you get to learn how to become more familiar with it, and then use that familiarity to tune into your inner self. Because that tuning, we're out of tune. We're not paying attention to what our body says. There's this somatic, embodied sense where sometimes do you not have that feeling when you know something is wrong, and your body knows something is wrong, your mind has not yet reached the conclusion?
Yeah, I get
A
it.
lot of times, if I flick something at your eye, you will close your eye before you're aware that something's coming close, right? And that's because your body already knows a lot of these things, these truths. So when we learn to pay attention to the body, we pay attention to the truths that the body is already aware of, but we have chosen to ignore. And once you're aware of these truths, you can do something about it.
The self.
The self.
Yeah.
And that's just the second layer. If you go further in, there's the mind and there's the sense of the self itself. And progressively, as you start stabilizing the more gross physical body and start working your way in, you have to do it all together. You can't just, get to layer 5 all at once. So you have to work with the outer body and then the inner body and then your mind and then your sense of self. And then you finally get to where you need to get to.
So people wait until that blissful state, but we can actually be blissful throughout our journey.
That's our natural state. We're just unaware. We just choose to forget that that's our natural state. And the kids are happy when you see kids. It doesn't matter how poor or their external conditions. Kids are happy. They haven't learned to be very unhappy. Sure, they're crying when they're hungry, but if they're well fed, then they're just happy, just being playful and inquisitive and curious. And that's that. And so that's our default state. We just forget it.
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes, and you can do it here. So what are you waiting for? Just go to the site. Well, Thomas, you've got prediabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have prediabetes. Big time.
We have a few more minutes. I'd love to talk about happiness. As I mentioned, isn't it that we need to drop being a victim and drop the attachments? And I guess the happiness comes with bliss.
So we tend to use different words and they have slightly different meanings. Happiness could be because conditioned by something that's happened outside, which is you've got something you were looking for, or there's something you wanted and now you have it. It's Christmas, you've got your gift, and you're happy. That's just one kind of happiness. Joy is a little longer term, it has a different kind of energy profile to it where you feel joy. It's more a mood that you might feel in. Bliss is a even wider energy profile. It's sort of the background of all lived experience. It's not quite the same thing as happiness because happiness tends to be conditioned by something outside. And anything that's conditioned by something outside can also be taken away by things outside. So today I won the presidency and I'm happy. Tomorrow somebody says something bad about me and I'm unhappy. And so now I'm hostage to this external situation all the time for my happiness, which is great and quite useless. So in fact, if you look at the pursuit of happiness, I would argue that happiness comes from pursuit rather than attaining a state, because there's no holding on to that happiness. A lot of unhappiness comes because we're trying to hold on to whatever it is that was at one time giving us happiness.
Which is the attachments?
Yeah, all attachments. We want things to not change, and then it becomes boring. We saturate. You know how our joy or happiness sort of goes up and then saturates. Then you're kind of bored of it, and next time you see the same thing, you don't want any of it, right? Which is why we like variety.
Right.
And so. Happiness tends to be conditioned by something outside, and my own feeling is that the pursuit of happiness is all about the pursuit and how that might bring you joy, rather than the happiness itself, which might be momentary, because you've got something. It's the same with kids who get Christmas presents. They've waited for it all year long, and now the anticipation is building, and now it's Christmas Eve, and boom, they have a gift. They unpack it, and they're so happy. 2 days later, you have no idea where that toy is. They've waited for 3 months for that toy, and it's just useless. It's just trash, right? And that's the problem with conditioned happiness. Joy, on the other hand, might be your state right now. You might be just feeling joyous. You're just in that you're just whistling to yourself, don't worry, be happy, and that's just who you are. That's how you're feeling right now. And it's a longer lasting state. It's a more resilient state. But then bliss, or ananda, as we call it in the yoga system, is a forever state. You never come out of that state. You can choose to forget it, but it's always there. One of the big sentences in the yoga system is Sad Chid Ananda. Satchit Ananda. And what it means is Sat is that which is true. Chid is the background of our consciousness. And Ananda is loosely translated as bliss. So the background of our consciousness is truly bliss. That's our default state. And forgetting it is what creates all the the clinging on to experiences, the clinging on to things. That those attachments can bring us unhappiness. They can bring us happiness, those things and those experiences, but clinging on to them after their due date, it's unhappiness.
The due date.
Yeah, it's due. If it's best before, and then if you have it any time after, then it's probably bad. It's the same thing. A lot of things that bring happiness can also be the source of much unhappiness because you're holding on to them for too long. So in the yoga system, our understanding is, and these are yogis who went deep into the self and experienced firsthand. This is not stuff they picked out from self-help books. This is direct perception of that bliss. When you dive deep into yourself, you will find all these treasures deep inside. But we're fools living at the surface of our experience, and just concerned by in collecting or hoarding our list of anxieties and pains, and never going deep inside where it's calm and blissful.
And also creating a world full of like-minded people really does help, wouldn't you say?
Misery loves company, and so does bliss, I guess.
So does bliss, yeah. It's a tough world. For example, I think even going to your sittings, your meditation classes in yoga, taking time out to do little things for ourselves and being around people who are like-minded makes things so much more pleasant and almost like you're breathing oxygen.
The tradition is called satsang. Sat, again, is, if we've talked about it, true, and sang means company, and it's good company. And so there's a very famous verse in one of our Hindi scriptures, not Sanskrit but Hindi, so it's more recent. And what it says is there's heaven and then there's liberation. You put them on one end of a scale and you put good company on the other end, and good company always wins. Satsang is better than going to heaven. Satsang is better than getting liberated. Satsang is far more, it's here, it's now.
It's here.
And
it's heaven on earth.
Yeah. And that's what the saying is. And I keep that with me all the time because good company. We're, as a species, we're empathetic. We're filled with empathy. We have mirror neurons that, I can sense your inner state, you can sense mine. But if we meet, then if you meet like-minded people or happy people, you feel, if you come next to a blissful person, you will feel their bliss, because that's how our minds are wired together. you can sense somebody's inner state, and that can transform your inner state. You remember how when you watch a movie and someone's had an accident, you're going to wince, right? Because you're sensing their inner state. And when you're in front of someone who's blissful all the time, not conditioned, then you will also feel it in their presence. And that is satsang. That is grace.
That warm, comfortable feeling of acceptance when you know there's no judgment or a story behind anything, which is kind of free. It's a really good feeling.
Yeah.
So creating that sacred space through choosing like-minded people. There are going to be people who are not so like-minded. We can't seclude ourselves completely, but it's just a matter of how we handle things too.
Actually, you should assemble people who are also not like-minded, because then they bring out the best in you. A lot of times the challenges that we face force us to rise above those challenges, and so that brings out things inside us that we didn't know were possible until we faced the challenge. And so if you only see people of one kind, you don't know what you're capable of.
Oh,
if
yes,
you don't
I
face
do
adversity,
understand that.
You've faced so much adversity, you've risen above it.
Yes.
And now you know you're capable of so much more, which you didn't know if you hadn't faced those adversities.
And be aware of not to become a victim to it.
Yeah.
Just see the light and rise above. Yeah, I get it.
I had a fun story. I was hearing this podcast about a reality show someone produced in a American Idol style reality show that was produced in an African country. The interesting part was this one line, where the point of every reality show is that the audience must engage with the participants. And for the audiences to engage with the participants, you must feel a sort of sympathy for them. And to feel that sympathy for them, you need a bad guy. You need someone who's a mean judge. It turns out the whole show works on the back of the meanness of the judge. You always want to get rid of the mean judge because you think that person's being such an ass. But the reality is the entire experience works because the mean judge is able to bring the best out of the people, and he is able to also bring sympathy out of the audience. So not so like-minded people allow you to have those experiences, to find the better you inside you, to find more people like you who now understand you because they also don't like this, this other experience and so on. So it turns out having a good mix of people around you is useful. The whole point of satsang isn't that they agree with your opinion. It's that you agree with their presence, whatever their opinion.
So how can you ever be unhappy when you have this awareness? Wherever there's a wrong, there's a right. So there's something that we can learn from everybody. No matter how wrong something may seem,
sure,
there's something that we can learn.
There's a famous Zen story around that. Would you like to hear it?
Of course.
So there's this old farmer in a village, and one day in his field, a horse comes in. This is a very beautiful horse, and so the horse stays in his field. So the farmer takes him in. So his neighbors say, "This is great luck. It's great fortune that you have a fantastic horse in your field." And he says, "Well, we'll see about it." And then his son begins to learn to ride the horse. And one day he falls and he fractures his leg. And everyone comes to him and says, "It's just terrible what's happened. It's just really bad luck that your son's, got a fracture." He says, "Well, we'll see about that." And then the king declares a war. And they conscript all the young men. They leave his son. And because he's had a fracture, you can't send a fractured person to a war. And then everyone comes to his home again and says, "Hey, this is great news that your son's not being sent out to enlist." And he says, "We'll see about it." The point is, you don't know if something is good or bad until it plays out. So why do you judge it beforehand?
That's right.
And so things that happen, you let them happen. Don't judge them, because they might be good things in the end. Or they might be bad things in the end. What looks like good fortune might be bad fortune, and what looks like bad fortune might be good. It depends on what time frame and what context you're looking at. So, so that's a good way, I feel, to understand that collecting a list of good fortune or bad fortune is probably not a great idea, because context changes everything.
That's right. One's unfortunate situation turns into something very fortunate. And it's such a cycle.
Yeah.
Be open.
Yes.
Yeah. So we are going to close. And I'm so thankful if there's any information you'd like to share with our audience, your podcast.
Sure. So if you're into meditations, I've recorded podcasts for everyday situations. And so you can now you meditate in the evening, morning, afternoon coffee, evening coffee, out for lunch, out for a walk, on a sunny day, on a dark day, all sorts of situations. You can look for Living Meditations on your podcasting app, and you can find it there. You can also find more information on my foundation's website and on my Facebook. And I'm happy to hear from everyone, so please send me comments.
Thank you so much.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you.